VCE.
Okay, great.
So, I don't know.
You got snowblind all of a sudden.
Unlimited ratings, are they actually considering now? Because if we do things that make us more flood resistant and resilient, that should make us
Yes.
more able to get a better bond rating from Moody's.
I thought you said movies. I was like, movies are getting ratings far down.
Are they in the bag?
Isn't that kind of a cool idea?
No, but I'm just gonna make sure.
Whatever's in the bag is still in here.
Okay, true.
Well, they probably do. I mean, it probably informs our insurance rates. I don't know. It's a good thought.
Moody thought.
Moody thought. All right. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you. My name is Annette Smith. Thank you to the chair and the committee for hearing my testimony today. I am Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment. For the last 2 decades, I have been an advocate working with Vermont citizens and towns to raise their voices and assist them in participating in environmental regulatory processes. VCE also works to hold corporations accountable for their impacts to Vermont communities. For the last decade, I have been immersed in renewable energy development as regulated by the Public Utility Commission. In today's presentation, I will share VCE's experience with specific environmental impacts of renewable energy development, especially wind and solar, on water quality, forests, wetlands, and wildlife, with an eye towards regulatory reform that results in meaningful environmental protection. VCE supports the intention of increasing protections for high elevations by reducing the elevation standard from above 2,500 feet to above 2,000 feet. However, we encourage the committee to consider that above 1,500 feet is defensible. Governor Dean Davis, the moving force behind Act 250, emphasized the importance of the 1,500-foot elevation and higher. He said, "We have taken the public policy position in our administrative agencies, which have this responsibility to give as near complete protection to what we call the pristine streams, those streams that are above 1,500 feet, where the streams are clean and unpolluted and where there is a movement, a very definite movement toward development." That statement is even more true today than it was when he said it. We offer several versions of maps to illustrate the different areas, some of which incorporate the Green Mountain National Forest, which, once incorporated, as it is in this map on the right, makes it clear that the above 1,500 feet standard is not as extreme as it appears without the National Forest included. We know, however, that the Green Mountain National Forest designation is not a prohibition against high elevation development. In the last 15 plus years, numerous high elevation industrial wind projects have been proposed for Vermont. And I realize I left 2 of them off. One is in the Northeast Kingdom. It was the East Haven project on East Mountain. And then there was a proposal in Manchester on Little Equinox too. 4 have been constructed. 3 include areas above 2,500 feet. 1 is above 1,500 feet. All 4 are in high priority habitat blocks. To date, the Agency of Natural Resources has opposed 3 wind projects, 2 of which were dropped by developers, the Vermont Community Wind Farm in Ira and Grandpa's Knob on the Pittsford Ridge. The developers did not drop the projects due to opposition by A&R, which was only clearly expressed in the Grandpa's Knob case. Community opposition drove off funders, which resulted in the developers going away. A&R also initially opposed the now constructed Deerfield Wind Project under Governor Douglas's administration, but that project was able to proceed due to A&R's agreement during Governor Shumlin's administration in 2016 to alter the Certificate of Public Good issued in 2009 that addressed bear habitat mitigation. If not for A&R and other parties' agreement, the project would not have proceeded. For unknown reasons, A&R did not oppose the Aeolian Wind Project, which was proposed in the largest and highest priority habitat block in Vermont. And that's the one. What has happened to the environment with the 4 operating industrial wind projects is a large topic that cannot be fully covered in this testimony. However, I will bring out key points to assist in informing the discussion about how Vermont is now regulating high elevation energy development projects with an eye to improving environmental protections. Sheffield Wind began operating at the end of 2011. It is primarily sited on a parcel owned by Meadows and Timber Company of New Hampshire, with some turbines on other leased smaller parcels. It is mostly above 2,000 feet, with some above 2,500 feet. The white on these maps is 2,500 feet. This is a map from the A&R Biofinder Atlas. It shows those colors. It contained important bear habitat and is part of a high priority habitat plot. The project required 5.5 miles of new roads. Water quality issues arose in 2008 and were well articulated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in a letter to A&R's Water Quality Division. These issues are fundamental to protecting water quality. What happened with the Sheffield Wind project set the stage for enabling the degradation of our high elevation waters. Writing for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Vern Lang identified 2 areas of concern: turbidity and temperature. The Wind Mountains in Sheffield contains numerous high elevation headwater streams. The turbidity standard for protecting aquatic habitat is 10 NTU. The species that live in high elevation streams are very sensitive to sedimentation, yet Vermont's A&R proposed a standard of 25 NTU, and Mr. Lang questioned how that will ensure compliance with the protective standard. Temperature is another critical area of importance to water quality, as Mr. Lang articulated in his 2008 letter.
Representative Bates.
We have to go back a second. What is NTU?
Turbidity units.
I was going to look that up this morning.
So you didn't know?
Well, I have known in the past, and I just didn't, but it's turbidity units, yes. But I
What the
thought
heck is a
somebody else-
turbidity unit?
What's the N for?
Nephelometric.
What? See, we use, I don't
It
know what
is,
that is.
How cloudy the water is.
Oh,
It's a way of
okay.
quantifying how cloudy the water is due to sediment.
Thank you.
I think it's based on
that word
opacity.
doesn't roll off the tongue very well.
Thank you.
Nephelometric turbidity unit.
There you go.
You're welcome.
You know more about it now.
Thank you.
So how did Sheffield Wind overcome Mr. Lang's concerns? Bernie Sanders got involved, and Vern Lang was taken off the case. A&R's stormwater permit set the monitoring locations a mile and more from the top of the mountain, essentially sacrificing the headwater streams entirely. Photos from the construction site, taken in 2011, show that sedimentation was entering high elevation streams. So this is coming off the road, and it's going off and into this area that is a stream, and the sediment's going there too. Runoff was underestimated. This is a quickly put together sediment basin that is made out of wood chips. Concentrated flow is occurring in areas where there was none before. In other words, new stream channels are being cut into the mountain. In response to VCE bringing these issues to A&R, while the project was under development, the site was declared to look excellent and substantially in compliance. Lowell Wind went into operation at the end of 2012. It is mostly built on parcels, on a parcel owned by one man from Oklahoma, along with some smaller lease parcels. It required 6.5 miles of new roads. The Lowell Ridge Line.
Representative McCullough?
So,
back to the previous slide where, it's under, well, it's the one where, it says, underline, the management of erosion on those logging roads could have been better, quote unquote. And of course, logging is, were they ever really logging roads? Or was it, or did somebody say they were, and so they could
That's a good
facilitate their
question.
construction?
It's hard to get straight answers. There were some logging roads up there. However, the roads that are built for these projects have to be the standard of interstate highways to handle heavy equipment. The interesting thing about that line, though, if you continue, the logging operation is governed under a separate permit that has different standards.
Oh, yeah.
So apparently sediment going into a stream from a logging operation is okay, but somehow that permit for logging the site for the wind project didn't come under that.
Yeah,
Good catch.
all right, thank you.
So we have Lowell Wind, and with 6.5 miles of new roads. So there's a road that is called the access road here. About this much of it was never a logging road. This part of it was a road, but from here on it was a whole new road. And that was sort of remnants of a very narrow road on some parts of the ridge line. The low ridge line contains peaks above 2,500 feet, some of which were blasted away entirely, so the white, those are above 2,500 feet. Most of the wind project is on lands above 2,000 feet. It is located on a ridgeline that is part of a high-priority habitat block that was identified by staying connected as important for connectivity and movement of wildlife in the region. As part of the regulatory process, parties entered into a connectivity easement to mitigate the impacts of the wind project. The connectivity easement parcel is a mile south of the Lowell Wind Project, and the intervening land is not conserved. So this land is not conserved. Anybody can do things on it, although I think Green Mountain Power now owns it, and I've asked them to conserve it, and they haven't. But the connectivity easement is what they're. The Lowell Ridge Line is in both the Lake Champlain and Lake Nemphamagog watersheds. 2.7 miles of new access road, most of which was not previously a logging road, plus 3.8 miles of ridgeline crane road were constructed to specifications similar to interstate highways, which was necessary to get the turbine parks weighing 200,000 pounds up to the ridgeline. Because Green Mountain Power was racing to get the project built to get the federal subsidy called the production tax credit, in some places the roads are wide enough for 2 big trucks to pass. The site has 27 acres of new impervious surface. Vermont's high elevation ridgelines have soils with the highest erodibility factors in the state. Low ridgeline has hydric soils and numerous class 2 wetlands. And for reference, it's on this side of the border with Albany, so it's very close. It's very easy to see where the wind project is because it's on the other side of the border. The wind project involved filling hundreds of feet of Class A1 headwaters above 2,500 feet to build the road network. Due to the lack of access to A&R stormwater staff, the opportunity to improve the project was lost. Experts hired by Energize Vermont found that the road could have been moved to avoid impacting the Class A1 stream. And that information and much more was provided to A&R, EPA, and the U.S. Army Corps. Nothing mattered, especially good science, as the political pressure to move the project forward was intense, as we were told directly by staff at both EPA and U.S. Army Corps. The people who told us that were either removed from the case or left their jobs. As with the Sheffield Wind Project, the state's regulatory response to the challenges of protecting high elevation headwater streams was solved by eliminating them from the monitoring requirements. At Lowell, the monitoring locations are a mile or 2 away from the ridgeline, assuring that the turbidity and temperature of the headwaters are unknown and unprotected.
Representative Bates.
Just for reference, what year did these projects take place?
Well, the Sheffield project was the first one to come online. It came online at the end of 2011. And I think I say this at the opening of every one of these project slides. The Georgia Mountain and Lowell projects came online at the end of 2012, and the fourth one, Deerfield Wind, came online at the end of 2017.
Okay, thank you.
We have some before and after photos. I have been on many high elevation ridgelines in Vermont in the last decade, and never have I experienced the beauty and vitality of the Lowell Mountain prior to its development or destruction. It was full of life, with moose dung everywhere, moss-covered rocks dripping with water, incredible botanical displays. It should have been a state park. Now, on a summer day, what had been cool with a tree-covered canopy is dry and hot exposed rock. Bald Peak was completely blasted away to make way for the road as it goes from east to west. There's a person right there standing there for scale. Gives you a sense of the scale. The amount of blasting that occurred for the Lowell Wind project is astonishing, but has never been disclosed. Estimates are that 1 million pounds of explosives were used, possibly more. The formula for blasting with ANFO, ammonium nitrate, and fuel oil, is that for every 1 million pounds of ANFO, ammonium nitrate, 9,000 gallons of fuel oil is needed. A groundwater public trust analysis should have been done by ANR as part of the Lowell Wind project development if 9,000 gallons of fuel oil was injected into the groundwater. The Lowell Ridgeline contains some very special areas, including this one on the eastern slope near the top of the mountain. What had been a beautiful natural area is now covered in toxic iron flock.
Toxic what?
Iron flock, or iron seeps. Another very special area is a wetland that ran both north and south. By 2016, it, along with much of the ridgeline environment, was mostly dry, and it was a drought year in parts of Vermont, but not in this particular area. In 2016, VCE conducted an investigation into the stormwater system at Lowell Wind. We should note that our numerous formal requests for a site visit by the water quality experts we have confidence in have been repeatedly denied by Green Mountain Power. However, the site is not posted, and the information we obtained was done legally. The stormwater system consists of conventional and innovative elements. The system in Sheffield was viewed by some as too big an impact with large stormwater retention ponds. So level spreaders were introduced as innovative for the Lowell stormwater system. The experts we work with at Princeton Hydro researched level spreaders and commented to ANR that they are absolutely not advised for steep slopes. The majority of the level spreader locations on the Lowell Mountain Wind project are on steep slopes. It made no difference that we gave them evidence that it's not appropriate. ANR disagreed. Our investigation found that even the traditional stormwater elements called wet ponds, and that's what you're looking at here, were not holding the water necessary for treatment. We further found that the wet ponds were leaking sediment that was flowing downhill on the backside of the wet pond, and in some cases creating new stream channels. The stormwater system requires regular maintenance, including removing sediment, which is then deposited uphill and seeded. That sediment likely contains heavy metals, but we are not aware of any testing or monitoring requirements. Numerous locations on the Lowell Mountain now have iron seeps, which kill life. We are under the impression that there is an iron flock mitigation requirement in the stormwater permit, but have seen no evidence that the problem is being addressed. The print on this says, when this occurs, the seep is comprised of low pH acid flock that will smother vegetation, wetlands, and stream substrates, but also create an environment that will preclude vegetative growth. The preclusion of vegetative growth will lead to more soil instability and subsequent erosion. This image provides some context for the location of what has been shown. So we're up at the top of the ridge line. This area is right here. This area is in here. And there are iron seeps that we found throughout the ridge line. We have by no means done a complete inventory.
Annette, point out the access road there to the left
So this is the access road.
from Route 100.
It comes up from Route 100, and all of this part was never a road. So this was all cut in. And what you're seeing here is the new transmission line that was put in. And it also goes over here. This is a level spreader. It's been repaired. When there are strong storms, water runs from the road into the level spreader, and if there's too much water, it runs over the top and down the back. Princeton Hydro predicted that this design would result in concentrated flow rather than sheet flow, and we have documented that is in fact what is occurring. So this is down below a level spreader, and it's supposed to, the idea of the level spreaders is it's just supposed to spread it out. But that's not happening in the areas that we have looked. Our investigation also revealed that large quantities of, I guess I'm looking at more concentrated flow. There we go. There's some more clearly eroding the forest floor. There's iron flock. Continue to degrade the hillside, create larger and larger rills and gullies. Our investigation also revealed that large quantities of herbicides are being used on the ridgeline to control invasive species, in this case right next to the water feature. 51 gallons of glyphosate and another rodeo, another very toxic chemical. We understand that Green Mountain Power switched to having the invasive species pulled by hand due to our investigation. You also see all of this is herbicide treated. Also note the forest dieback here. This image from the 2015 invasive species report shows the area of the intersection of the access road and the Ridgeline Road, along with the chart from the same report that shows that the invasive species are increasing and spreading every year. These invasives will eventually make their way to the interior forest. Here's the chart that shows the spread. This is from the 2015 report. I have not yet gotten the 2016, 17, and 18 reports, but I have to request them. So the numbers there. We also found that numerous trees were dying along the roadside edges and extending into the forest below. Eric Sorensen of A&R predicted what would happen, and what would and is happening. So this was in Montaigne Yellow Birch Forest, now Turbine 13. That's completely gone. Eric testified this project will result in the construction of 6.5 miles of 65 to 205 foot wide, mostly rock blasted road and turbine pads in mature montane forest along the ridgeline in one of the larger blocks of unfragmented habitat in the region. At the construction site for this project, there will not merely be a change in vegetation type, but instead there will be a complete conversion from mature montane forest to industrial wind farm. This area will be permanently altered by removal of soil, bedrock blasting, and regrading. We cannot predict what will grow on this disturbed site after decommissioning, but we can be confident that it will not be the mature montane spruce fir forest or montane yellow birch red spruce forest that occurs there now. His testimony is proving to have been accurate. The montane yellow birch forest is experiencing group mortality, which is not normal. That's what this is. Green Mountain Power submitted its petition to the PUC during the Douglas administration. The testimony of A&R staff was that the project would have an undue adverse impact on the environment. Within 2 months of taking office, Governor Shumlin held a press conference and announced that GMP would march in lockstep with A&R. The A&R and Department of Public Service staff testimony changed overnight, all stating that there would not be an undue adverse impact, even though the facts did not change. After publishing our investigation in 2016 and presenting it to an earlier version of this committee, the only change we were aware of was the hand-pulling of invasives. A&R continued to defend the stormwater system as operating according to design with no problems. We went back in 2017 and found iron seeps with no evidence of mitigation and more maintenance of level spreaders. Level spreader, then fresh rock. We also found that someone had made a rather lame attempt to stay the flow of sediment downhill of the level spreader by cutting up a tree and putting in stakes. It wasn't working, but is evidence that someone knows there is a problem with uncontrolled sedimentation flowing from the stormwater features. There's 3 logs, and one's here, and the next one goes from there. This is then downhill below that attempt to keep the sediment from moving further down. Georgia Mountain Wind went online at the end of 2012. It is located on parcels primarily owned by one person or his company. It required about a mile of hardened road. The site is above 1,500 feet and is in a high priority habitat block. There were some rare and irreplaceable natural areas, and the town plan contained protective language, but it didn't matter. The people who live in the area are devastated by the destruction of the beautiful mountaintop. Because of its size, it did not require an individual stormwater permit. It has a huge stormwater basin at the bottom of the mountain. When people from Swanton and Fairfield, with some expertise in water quality and roads, visited the Georgia Mountain Wind site to learn about industrial wind when a wind project was proposed for their neighborhood, they followed the system down to the stormwater pond and found everything was blocked with debris and the system was not being maintained properly. Deerfield Wind went online at the end of 2017. It required 5 miles of new roads. It is the first industrial wind project to be built on U.S. Forest Service lands. Deerfield Wind, wind turbines are all above 2,500 feet in a high priority habitat block. In fact, the 2 ridge lines contain the highest quality beach stand in the state, which was the Bear Cafeteria. A&R opposed the project, and on the witness stand, the bear biologists testified that destroying the beach forest for the wind project could wipe out a genetically distinct family of bears. There aren't updated Google Earth images, so I hunted and I found this one. The George D. Aiken Wilderness is about 5,000 acres here, and then this is what's called the Western Array. It has turbines that are 418 feet tall. This is the Eastern Array. It has turbines that are about 397 feet tall. The PUC approved the project in 2009 in a split 2-to-1 decision. The NRC was also a party in opposition. Neither A&R nor the NRC appealed the project's approval. After the U.S. Forest Service issued its special use permit, the Models for a Clean Environment sued the USDA, U.S. Forest Service, in an attempt to protect the George D. Aiken Wilderness next to the project site and to protect the bear habitat and water quality, as the same stormwater system with traditional and level spreader elements was already permitted by A&R for Deerfield Wind. This is what the western ridgeline looked like. It was beautiful, full of beech trees. These are some photos I actually just got yesterday. This is the traditional system and a level spreader. This is a turbine off here. There a lot of area. This is the eastern ridge line. These are the older turbines that are 197 feet tall. These are the shorter new ones, 397 feet tall. As with all of our experiences with wind project approvals, even in federal court, when the decision came out, it was as though we weren't even there. The project was on President Obama's top 10 infrastructure projects nationwide to fast track. Judge Garvin Murtha ruled in favor of the USDA, U.S. Forest Service, and we did not appeal to the Second Circuit Court. Condition 11 of the PUC's approval required, and this is in 2009, 10 years ago, required the conservation of at least 144 acres of comparable remote, high elevation area of concentrated beach stands. Deerfield Wind was not able to commence any site work until the board approved the mitigation proposal. The PUC also required Deerfield Wind to fund a multi-year study of the impact of the project on bears. Something that should have been done for Lowell and Sheffield, requiring some pre- and post-construction studies. Unable to find that much high-quality beech forest, no surprise since it is the highest quality in the state, in 2016, Iberdrola returned to the PUC with a deal negotiated with A&R and the parties to the case, including the NRC, in which the Stratton conservation easement was put forward as a partial solution. Though not final, it was said to have been negotiated by the Conservation Fund a year before and would lease 100 acres of forest near Stratton from Meadows End Timber Company. The rest of the required mitigation lands would be acquired later, and A&R assured the PUC that they could be found, eventually. In August 2016, the PUC approved the change to the CPG condition with no deadline for conserving the additional acreage, and the caveat that if the Stratton conservation easement fell through, money could be paid to A&R, and A&R would be able to conserve the full 144 acres using the funds provided. On Monday night, just this past Monday, the A&R person conducting the bear study made a presentation in Woodford about the bear study. In response to questions at the end, she disclosed that the Stratton conservation easement fell through. Apparently the timber company raised their price. And so at this time, a decade after the CPG was issued, and nearly 3 years after the mitigation condition was changed, no mitigation lands have been acquired, and there is no deadline for when that must occur. The bear study is still a work in progress, but some information was provided. Because of VCE's litigation, a lot of preliminary data was obtained. It clearly showed that the two ridge lines proposed for the wind project were the feeding ground for bears. This image shows the pattern of one female bear before the project was built. This is the western ridge line, which has the beautiful best beach stand and the tallest turbines. This was before it was constructed, and this was during the October feeding season in 2015, and it was a good beech nut crop, which apparently occurs every 2 years. Then it shows what she did during the construction season, another good beech nut year, roughly the same time period. And she did come over and feed, but she stayed clear of the activity that was blasting and a tremendous amount of development with heavy equipment going on there. So she fed there some, and she also went over here lower down, but didn't go higher up. The behavior of another bear during the October 2017 bear feeding and wind construction period shows one male. This is just all data for one male. And Jacqueline said that he never went east of Searsburg before. And what he did was he came through the site, but didn't enter it at all. These points are about every 20 minutes. And then once they get out of the target area, the time is further away. So he went here, here, here. He'd never gone over here before. And he just came back to this area. This is the Aiken Wilderness. Deerfield Wind Bear study will continue until 2021. It would be good if it continued further to see how they adapt to the wind turbine development. So this shows that they didn't like construction. Renewable energy development has enabled some things that I never ever thought I would see in Vermont. One is the filling of Class A1 headwater streams above 2,500 feet. Another is allowing development on Class 2 wetlands. Up until about 2016, we were aware of only 2 permits issued by ANR for solar projects on Class 2 wetlands. We thought they had learned their lesson and weren't going to do it anymore. During one PUC case where the ANR Wetlands Division person was on the witness stand, she disclosed under questioning that ANR had issued a lot more than 2 such permits. So I got the files and put them into a spreadsheet. And I've given you all, it's not here, but I've given you the complete spreadsheet of the 60 different permits. You can find that in the postal information. I pulled out the basic numbers, and I do have all the permits if you want.
Question.
Yes, Representative Keller.
So this, what comprises the data of these square feet or acreage? The square footage of the PV panels themselves, the square footage of concrete bases, the square footage of disturbed soil for buried lines, all of the above or some of the above? Or?
So in the column on the right that says project size, the permits, most of them say what it's for. So you'll see some of them say that it's for a ground-mounted solar array. Some will say buried utility line.
Okay.
Some will say 382 solar panels. Some will say buried electrical cable. And then it was divided up into actual filling of the wetlands, temporary impact on the wetlands themselves, permanent Class 2 wetland impact, temporary buffer zone impacts, and then the 50-foot buffer zone impacts.
And so your data is all of the above from that project size category?
So for this chart, I just added up all the fill and temporary and all those numbers. So some of them are for utility lines, but most of them are for the actual solar arrays. By the way, I live off grid with solar. I love solar. I'm not anti-renewable in any way.
Thank you.
Okay? So I'm going to show you two projects. South 40 Solar is in Burlington on a forested Class 2 wetland next to Lake Champlain. With all the concern about water quality in Lake Champlain, this is the last site I would have thought would have been approved for development. I was contacted by a neighbor who intervened and brought all the relevant documents for Burlington, which included the goal of increasing the inventory of trees in the city into the PUC process to zero effect. The desired amount of forest is cut after permits were issued by ANR and the PUC with approval by Burlington. Burlington Electric Department is purchasing the power at above market rates. The Barton Solar Site, Representative Lefebvre is probably familiar with this one, is almost entirely a Class 2 wetland. VCE assisted the neighbors to the south in their participation at the PUC in 2014. We filed comments on the draft wetlands permit. The only comment we filed on any of these permits for solar and wetlands, and probably the last comment VCE has filed with ANR because nothing we say ever seems to make any difference. Our comments were assisted by input from Princeton Hydro, where their environmental engineer was at the time pursuing his master's degree, and his thesis was about solar siting and the impacts to the environment. So he made comments about wet sites being especially susceptible to compaction just from the installation of the project, and he also raises an issue that's been a sticking point for a lot of us, and that is that ANR only calculates the pole that goes into the ground, and it doesn't use the solar panel itself to calculate the stormwater runoff. So say you're building a pole barn with a roof, the roof would count, but if you put up a solar array, all that's counted is the post that goes into the ground.
That was part of the genesis of my question. Were you using the PV as well in your
Okay, yeah, well,
It's what it wants.
the regulators do not consider the runoff from the panels themselves.
I have a quick
Representative
question.
Bates.
Where does the Pownell solar field fall into your category here?
The only things that are listed there are what class 2. I don't recall.
It's right on the Hoosick River, so I'm
Right,
curious.
but I don't recall that it had a class 2 wetlands permit. I did put in the town for all of these things.
Just because it's on a riverbank and everything, it doesn't? Okay.
Yeah, this is just specific to wetlands. You could take, this is a big topic. You could take a look at flood hazard zones and all kinds of other issues about solar siting. That I've seen some of that, but I'm trying to keep it focused on just a few points.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. In addition to the narrative, we provided numerous citations to support our comments with the goal of educating ANR staff. I mean, this is new, we're all learning, we all want to make the right choices. The wetlands permit was issued, the project was built, and as anticipated, a tremendous amount of sediment came off the site in spring. To such an extent that a neighbor dug a trench to the river to keep the sediment from spreading onto his fields. After that occurred, the USDA advertised that the applicant applied for financial assistance with the requirement of a no significant impact finding. VCE and the neighbor submitted comments and photos. No matter, the money was awarded. Solar, forests, and wildlife. Some aspects of solar siting that we keep encountering are not foreseen in the regulatory process. Specifically, the impacts on forests to be cleared for solar projects and areas occupied by wildlife that do not rise to the status of necessary wildlife habitat. Take, for instance, the parcel proposed for development next to a major highway interchange. The forest on the 27-acre parcel, that would be this parcel here, is fairly low in priority for habitat. But the people who live in the residential neighborhood uphill say it has bear, deer, and small game that have already been displaced by the road construction. It is home to a lot of creatures. Additionally, the forest is providing functions as an urban forest, mitigating air pollution, noise, and wind for the residential development uphill. Vermont currently places zero value on this type of forest. Another example is in another urban area with a forest that is currently being cleared on a 56-acre parcel. That's this parcel here. In this case, A&R's deer biologist said that there is no deer browsing, while VCE's wildlife expert says it's the most heavily browsed site he's ever seen in that area. A hunter shot a buck in that forest during the last hunting season. Vermont has no mechanism in place for addressing urban forests that are providing real benefits to the environment and the people who live in the area. This is just one website. There isn't actually a Vermont Urban Forest Society. It's an issue that is growing in understanding of the value of urban forests.
Representative Hall.
We do have a state urban forester, and have you communicate, used to be her, I don't know who it is now, communicate these projects with her? What kind of a working relationship has that urban forestry department had with it?
I believe that the citizens who live in that neighborhood were in contact and really didn't get anywhere. I talked to Mike Snyder about this particular case, and also when Sue Minter was Secretary of Transportation, I thought, if the impacts to the people uphill are worse, because they've already got a lot of noise from the traffic and the forest is buffering that noise, or is this going to create some sort of liability for the state?
Sure.
But we have gotten no assistance from anybody on the forestry issue.
Thank you.
The issue of clearing forests for solar must be dealt with. Why do I make that statement? Because Act 174's enhanced energy planning is resulting in the production of maps that are being given to towns to help them plan for renewable energy. Just this week, one town's draft energy plan came to my attention and is especially useful in making my point. The draft plan says that everything identified as prime, in this light green color, on the solar resource map should be considered by the PUC to be preferred, and that by joint letter of the town select board and planning commission, the areas in orange as constraints can also be considered preferred. Now, the preferred sites designation for net metered projects gets a higher amount of money. When you have an enhanced energy plan, and your plan gets a higher standard. Supposedly, we haven't seen any decisions yet, but it's substantial difference instead of due consideration. To evaluate what that means, I overlaid the solar resource map on Google Earth and turned down the opacity. Nearly every site shown in light green turns out to be forested, with only a couple of fields. Here's some close-ups to illustrate the point. And there are more. So, green, turn it down, forested. Another completely different area. I think I only noticed one or two fields. Now this is a draft, it's not finished, but we have no idea how many towns are just taking these maps and doing this. And during the process of developing the enhanced energy plans, there were 3 pilot regional planning commissions, and I attended the Bennington meeting, and I said, a lot of these sites that you have as prime are forested, would you please do a cut to show us what it looks like without the forest? And they never did it. So every single region is getting these maps that all have these forested sites with prime, and without any kind of discussion about what it means to cut a forest for solar. Vermont's forests have value, so much so that the Nature Conservancy and the Vermont Land Trust are monetizing those values and entering into agreements with landowners regarding management of forested parcels so that the climate change attributes can be sold to California to offset that state's carbon emissions. This legislature has embarked on a timely effort to update the state's land use law. Housing, ski areas, pits and quarries, and commercial development are now joined by major environmental impacts from renewable energy development. As implemented by the PUC via a legalistic process that allows A&R to enter into MOUs with applicants outside of any public process, the result has become a bad joke to those of us who care about protecting Vermont's environment. Any discussion about updating Act 250 must address the types of environmental impacts I have identified for you today. I also have some specific comments on the committee's draft legislation. Would you like to hear those now, or do you want to do questions?
Let's pause and see if there are questions for you. Representative Odie.
If you have to give a bulleted list of the things that need to be addressed outside of the Act 250 legislation, do you have that bulleted list?
I can give it to you. It's going to be, it's a lot, yeah. I mean, the stormwater issues are imperative to address. The wetlands issues, I think, need to be looked at in terms of what's happening. Similarly with the wildlife in the forest, that's why I highlighted those. There are plenty of other issues, birds and bats. I didn't get into the impacts on them and how those studies are gained so that they underestimate the results.
And also things like A&R entering
MOUs, memorandums of understanding, yeah. And in fact, it's interesting, this is Vermont Town Government Day, because was it 2016, I think it was 2016, we worked with Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and there was testimony in this committee about some of these impacts, things like the MOU issue. Representative McCullough, you may remember that, the impacts on grassland birds, bobolink habitat, and how the developers are paying into funds for whatever they destroy. Similarly with rare, threatened, and endangered species, the developers just pay into the fund. So we're going to get into this, but your proposal about mitigation in the bill just is like, it's just let everybody pay to destroy the environment. And when you see what's happened with the Deerfield wind mitigation, it's very concerning. But if you'd like that list, I will see if I can come up.
Representative Fave.
Was there any permit required for the Barton Solar project? By the town itself or by the NVDA?
I believe that the town of Barton signed off on it. The neighbors did go to the whatever discussions there were.
Mhm.
Now, remember, this was 2014, so it was 5 years ago.
Right.
It was the first solar case that we got involved in. It was a nightmare at the PUC. And in fact, the neighbors were retaliated against by the developers after the fact over some red threatened and endangered species issues. So, you know, when you talk about town approval, most towns say, well, the PUC decides and there's nothing we can do. The town definitely didn't oppose it. I don't recall any activity by the NVDA, but again, this was pretty early on in this type of development.
As it's gone forward, have you seen more activity by the regional planning commissions in terms of whether, how planning works and whether or not this is appropriate kind of development?
What I'm seeing at the regional planning and municipal planning process since the passage of Act 174 is that there are towns and regions that are making an attempt, but it's coming down to, for instance, to get a preferred site, there are two ways to do it for net metering. One is you choose a disturbed site, gravel pit, quarry, something that is really appropriate. But the other way that they've allowed you to do it is you can go to the Select Board Planning Commission and the Regional Planning Commission, and if they all agree it's a preferred site, then you get preferred site, and then you get more money at the as part of the project. Now, how that is actually played out, and I'm on the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, and I'm on my town's planning commission, so I have some good insight into these things. So what happens is that the developer first goes with the landowner to the Select Board and Planning Commission, either joint meeting or separate meeting. And well, the landowner's there, and they're nice people. And this is going to help them keep the land open, and you know, they're going to make some money from it, and pay the taxes, and so they sign off on it. And then they come to the Regional Planning Commission. And the Regional Planning Commission says, oh, the towns say it's okay, so I guess it's okay with us. I think I voted against all but one preferred sites letter at our Regional Planning Commission, and I'm the only person who votes against them. Except, and one of the reasons is because there are other issues aside from just the site. You need to understand what the grid capacity is. You need to know what the customer is. So these preferred sites letters are coming in before any of that information is known. Some of the companies, most of the companies are not lining up customers until they get their CPGs. They say that Green Mountain Power used to give them grid capacity information, but they won't now until they pay money into it. And so you're making a decision in a vacuum. And I think the enhanced energy planning process is a real problem for volunteer planners. And I'm getting contacted a lot by towns. They don't know what to do. They're trying. We have 2 towns in our region that have enhanced energy plans. The town of Sudbury had a guy who went out and talked to people about farmland, and they came up with a map that has 2 preferred sites on it, and they've already gotten development proposals for those sites. So it's also an issue where if you do the enhanced energy planning process, you are inviting the developers in. And some towns don't want to do that.
Does DPR have any kind of role in this? Private, public, research, resources, DPR, public?
You mean the Department of Public Service?
Yes, I'm sorry, wrong acronym.
Well, they approved all of the regional energy plans, and now the regional planning commissions can approve the municipal plans. It's not working. I think the whole thing should be revised or repealed. And I say that as someone who's seen a lot of struggle and time go into it, and yet, how many years ago was that passed? 2 or 3. We have yet to see a project come to the PUC that has had an enhanced energy plan of any sort that's had a decision come up. So we don't know if that substantial deference even is going to hold, because the PUC doesn't have to agree with what the town says. They just have to explain if they don't agree.
All right. move on to your next, right, Representative McCullough, are you all right? You have a question?
I've got, I think they're probably all part of this presentation, so rather than you really
Sorry, but you were.
surprised. Thank you. We understand that the draft proposal for stormwater rules is on the cusp of approval. And while not presented by Patrick to us, I'm guessing that that draft proposal includes acceptance of what we experimental structure.
What had been called experimental or innovative is
Innovative,
now,
yeah.
it's now no longer in that category.
Right.
And we actually sponsored Jeff Dahl of Princeton Hydro to participate in the development of, I think it was the previous stormwater rule. There was a lot of, there were a lot of meetings that went on about that. And we tried to make a point about these things and have gotten nowhere.
So what we've just seen in these slides as innovative are now actually just part of the gospel.
That's right. And in fact, when we did our investigation of the Lowell site, I wrote to the EPA Region 1 administrator and asked them to please intervene and withhold the development of Deerfield Wind site until a complete investigation could be done of Lowell, or until the site plan, the stormwater system could be revised, because why make the same mistake twice? And I think we got a polite blow off.
So we also, earlier today, we got testimony that 5% of the roads in our forest blocks are, the forest roads actually equal 5% of that surface area. And I'm going, what, really? And now I'm seeing that veggie map is picking up 5 miles here, 8 miles there, 6 miles here of high energy, high elevation wind roads. And it probably is, of course, that data wasn't broken down, but
Yeah.
you just gave us an awful lot of mileage of road.
Yeah, when you consider the level to which they have to be built, you
Yes.
look at how our roads are
Yeah.
for us peasants. It's a lot of investment in some pretty heavy duty roads.
And so this has mostly been, so the final question for this section is, I think this committee needs to consider Act 50 involvement that takes a lot of responsibility for permitting into its shop and gets it out of the PUC.
I think that may be where we're headed here.
Well,
Maybe
there
we could-
are two ways of doing this, I think. I mean, the Commission on Act 250 has heard from me about moving land use issues from the PUC to Act 250. But in the short term, one thing that could be done is the legislature is the body that told the PUC to incorporate some, but not all of the Act 250 criteria into their review. And so you do have some ability to give them new guidance on what it is you want them to look at. I mean, one of the things that we've heard from A&R about the PUC is, well, they actually do look at fragmentation and connectivity, and currently Act 250 doesn't. So all you need to do is give them more guidance if you wanted to do that. But honestly, the PUC process is so impossible that it works for rate cases, it works for utilities and lawyers. It does not work for the people, and it definitely doesn't work for the environment.
Maybe your next presentation will speak more to that.
I wanted to say one more thing about the roads. One of the big issues in both Sheffield and Lowell was what's called the curve number. Have you heard that term in this committee? Well, it's how you model the road for the water infiltrating. So the turbine pads, which this is one, the way I took this picture, I was up on the Wall Mountain, and a fuel oil truck came up to refuel things. Green energy at its best. But this would be the turbine is right over here.
Did you say curb or curve?
Curve, C-U-R-V-E. So these turbine pads were modeled as a cemetery lawn. So they were given a very low number, something like 70, where they should have been in the 90s. I mean, these are hard. The water does not go down into them. And so both, and by the way, all these stormwater permits were appealed. The Sheffield permit was appealed to the environmental court, and then the legislature intervened and said, oh, the wind developers need one-stop shopping, so they moved those appeals to the Public Utility Commission, and they heard the appeals of all stormwater permits. And so this was litigated, and again, didn't matter what anybody said, there were good experts making the right points, and one of the points about the curve numbers was that they are underestimating the volume and velocity of stormwater runoff from these sites by about 20 to 30%. But all of the decision makers, the regulators, the courts have all sided with the wind industry and their experts.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes left, so.
I don't have that much here, so.
Okay.
Okay? So the legislation that I found was your 123-2019 draft. I don't know if there's a more recent one, so I'm short of page numbers, but I'll also give you the topic. So on page 13, the board appointment process, which you have as being a direct appointment by the government. Please use the judicial nominating board process. Act 250 has become the place where governors appoint their political supporters. It is imperative that the new board is distanced from political influence. So, for instance, you could do how the Public Utility Commission people are appointed. The chair is appointed through the judicial nominating process. They advertise and people apply, and then they're interviewed, and a list is given to the governor. The other two members are appointed by a slightly different process where the governor gives a list to the judicial nominating committee. They vet those candidates, and then they give the governor back a cut from those. If there's one thing that you take away from my presentation today, it is that political influence on environmental issues is not good. And if you want to protect the environment, which I've had the pleasure of working with some incredible good environmentalists in the last decade, Sue Morse, Steve Young, Steve Wright, people who have devoted their lives to addressing climate change and all kinds of issues that have been just devastated by what's happened with the development of renewable energy. And at a certain point, why bother? If you never, ever, ever make a dent, then should we just give up, or should we continue to try and protect the environment? And I'm not partisan. I'm not trying to slam anybody. I just care about the environment. I want us to have honest environmental protection. I'm not seeing that will happen with the political appointment process. It needs to have some distance. And the judicial nominating process does work.
Representative Bates.
I'm very new to this, okay? First time here. You have to explain what political influence means to me.
Okay?
Because I have no clue, really. I
All right,
just
so
don't have a clue.
in terms of the Lowell Wind Project, scientists and Department of Public Service economists all put in testimony that there would be an undue adverse impact to the environment, or in the case of the Department of Public Service, the economy. And then that was under Governor Douglas.
But are you talking about the state level influence or local level influence? I am lost.
Well, I did reference a little local level influence in terms of developing preferred sites, but what I'm speaking to here is that putting some distance between those direct political appointments and the people who serve on these boards is beneficial. And it avoids, over the years, I've watched.
So you have to give me an example.
Okay, I've watched the Act 250 district commissions when we get a new governor, populated by people of that party, and often people who were political supporters. So it's kind of a plum appointment. And while they're staggered, and so different governors can influence things to a little.
Okay.
There is some politicization of the process.
Okay.
And if you're going to create a new board, this is what I'm talking about, is that it really is important to try and distance it.
Annette, you might, John Brabant, I'm with Vermonters for a Clean Environment, you might bring up what happened November of 2010 at the Public Service Board with regard to Lowell, and then what the testimony evolved into in February of
Right, that's what I
2011.
just was referencing. Then once Governor Shulman came into office, they all flipped their testimony, everything is fine, MOUs came through, and the scientists at A&R are good people, and they're trying to do a good job.
So if I'm a big supporter of somebody and I want a position on a board, I donate $2 million. All of a sudden now I'm going to be appointed to the board?
You're gonna be chair.
You know, I'm just saying that.
You don't
Is
have
that
to
what
pay
you're
that
talking?
much in
No, I got
this.
I guess what I'm saying is that what you're saying is that I would be appointed and then I would have some sort of influence over whether a project gets done or not?
I am not trying to use the word corrupt, but there
Well, you just did.
is some level of that is taking place.
In this state?
Yeah.
Boy, I don't know where I'm living, but boy, okay.
You're not right up southern.
Yeah, I'm in the southern part of the state,
So
so,
am I.
you know, wow. All right, thank you.
Also, the language about experience should be revised to delete the word shall be sought to have experience, to say shall have experience.
Sorry, what, are you on the
Where-
same
where
page?
are
I'm
we
on the
now?
same page.
Line number,
Sorry, I don't have the bill in front of me.
oh,
But it's about the board appointment
Okay.
process. And that, so they can say, look, we looked for somebody, that doesn't mean we chose somebody. So some of the appointments I've just seen come out of the governor's office are people who I can't tell have any experience on the environment. And I've seen this before. I've been around for 20 years watching this go on. And I've watched especially the chairs of what was the Environmental Board and now the Natural Resources Board, who serve at the whim of the governor. And I've heard stories about how the governors make phone calls and then the decisions come out the way they want them to because people with business interests have come to the governor. I mean, it happens. On page 28, and that's about the slate quarry exemption. I can promise you there are people who live in the slate quarry who would be happy to come and testify and talk to you about what it's like. I got an email yesterday from someone about a blast that just went off, and it's just really, really disturbing to everybody. So I shared the draft language with some of the neighbors of the slate quarry, and they don't see that you're eliminating the exemption. If that's what you're doing, that's good, but it doesn't read that way. There's so many knots and kind of double negatives and things that I have trouble. So VCE suggests adding language that clearly states that all slate quarries currently in operation are required to file for an Act 250 permit by January 1, 2020, and that no quarry not yet operational shall commence any operations or improvements without first seeking and then receiving an Act 250 and any other state and local permits required for operation. Quarry owners and prospective quarry property owners shall consult with an A&R Act 250 permit specialist to determine what permits may be required for their current and proposed operations. That's a much clearer way of stating what I believe is the intention.
is this part of your written testimony?
It's on the last page, so you'll have a copy of it. On page 36, 37, it looks like you're eliminating one of the criteria about groundwater, about water supply. And I suggest that rather than eliminate it, that you replace it. One of the good work that we've done over the years was the groundwater protection law, which does now consider groundwater to be a public trust resource. So for instance, on the Lowell Wind Project, they should have done a public trust analysis. And so is there some way of incorporating that type of protection. It won't be applicable to all cases, but I think that it would be beneficial to incorporate some specific language about groundwater protection rather than eliminating it.
Did you say page 36, 37?
It's on, actually on this bill, it's on top of page 37. So, does have sufficient water available for reasonably foreseeable needs of the subdivision will not cause unreasonable burden. Now, this was intended to address housing developments, but as I think I've shown you, there are a lot of other issues.
5.2.
Yeah, I know, I'm looking at, thank you, but I don't see what's been eliminated.
Well, 3 is crossed out. So, and at the bottom
It's
of-
just renumbered, because we changed above.
Oh, good.
I mean, if you see text that's.
Well, I saw 2 crossed out here,
The number 2 is crossed out, but the,
and then I saw 3 crossed out too.
wait, but the
And there's
text
no-
is not crossed out, so if the text isn't crossed out, it's just a renumber.
Okay, well, in any case, consider that groundwater is a public trust and how to incorporate that.
Okay.
And I'm sure the DNRC could give you guidance on that, we work with them on that provision. Page 40, this whole section on mitigation. Mitigation doesn't work. I also happen to have been involved in the very first case. I wasn't involved at the time, but I saw the effects 20 years later. Very first case of deer mitigation was involved quarry in Clarendon, where they had clear-cut a deer yard in 1987, 88 in anticipation of filing for an Act 50 permit. And the district commission denied the permit. It was appealed to the environmental board, which allowed them to do the quarry, but they had to offset the damage to the 30-acre deer yard by purchasing 300 acres of deer yard. And they did set a time frame, so I think it was finished in like 1996. Well, one man, a neighbor, put a sign out, deer 8 miles that way. The locals talked about how the deer would jump the cage wire fence with barbed wire, and they go in between, and there would be, they get bloody, and then the coyotes would come, and there were apparently deer in the quarry that died because they didn't leave their home ground. And I talked to a forester, Mark Skakel, who lived right in the area with some of the mitigation lands, and he said, the interesting thing was that there were deer there when they bought the land, but there aren't any now. So I don't know who came up with this section on mitigation, but I was really very surprised to see it in here. Until and unless a statute is written which states that irreplaceable resources shall have their permit request denied, language such as is in this bill just creates yet another mechanism for developing our last remaining and irreplaceable natural resources and wildlife habitat. Precautionary principle needs to be written into this bill where critical core forests and habitat are threatened with permanent damage. The burden needs to be placed on the developer to prove that the project will have no impact on the resource. So I've given you a really clear example in what's happened with Deerfield Point. Is that mitigation ever going to occur? And if it does, how is that going to benefit the bears? On page 78, the development cabinet, I just suggest that you add that meetings shall be warned and open to the public unless your intention is that they should meet not available to the public. Because of the challenges we've experienced with A&R and other state agencies, we recommend including citizen suits in this legislation. There wasn't some legislation last year that passed the Senate unanimously. And we also need to see, and I'm actually surprised that it's not in here already, some addition to Act 250 that addresses cumulative impacts.
Addresses what?
Cumulative impacts. I mean, when you think about that Deerfield Wind project, just south of it in Massachusetts is another wind project. And there has been a plan by Iberdrola that some people said they've heard Iberdrola talk about. Iberdrola, which changed its name to Avangrid, is the developer of both of those projects. And they've apparently thought about doing one in between too. What is the cumulative impact of all these projects?
Do you have language suggesting, because this is a really tough issue that we've talked a fair amount about, and it's
I would be glad to follow up with any language requests. I know that I am raising issues like forests and solar that are very difficult to address. And so I'll see what I can do on the cumulative impact. And I appreciate this is not easy. I started my work on this as an advocate on the gas power plant project that involved 63 miles of pipeline. I am very, very much aware of property rights, and as an impacted landowner myself on that project. And so there's a balance here that has to be met, but we've done it. Some towns have, for instance, have ridgeline ordinances. Waitsfield does, can't develop above a certain amount, certain height. Dorset does. You could ask VLCT if they could provide you with a list of all the towns that have ridgeline ordinances, if anybody's ever compiled that. Maybe the state could do a ridgeline ordinance if towns can do it. So if you ask John for any follow-ups that you'd like us to work on, we'll be happy to do that. He's in the building. So I thank you very much for the time and for listening.
Thank you so much for coming. Any other questions for Annette? Representative McCullough.
As long as you're still in the chair, John is listening. I'd like some help in trying to. We've got the PUC conundrum with the political appointments and so on, as well as they have a certain expertise which you've acknowledged, but some of us think they've fallen way, way down on solar and wind projects throughout the years, again, because of political stuff, largely. I'd like to know how, and this might be with the proposed language, how we might, in our bill, address and change that and incorporate that. So no discussion time, but that, yeah. I just gave you a month's worth of homework. We've got a couple of days.
I will defend the PUC a bit and say that while in the past I think that it has been influenced politically, I'm not sure that's so much what's happening right now. The problem is that the legislature has passed some legislation, it's in the 8000s, 8005, section 248, or section title 30, that direct the PUC to promote renewable energy. And so that's, when I've asked them, that's the overriding answer. We're going to keep doing this. The former chair came in and said, if you don't like what we're doing, tell us and we'll do something different. So Representative Klein, when he chaired the House Natural Resources and Energy Committee, actually wrote a letter saying, we're not telling you to approve everything. You have to use some judgment. Well, they then did deny a project, but now they backpedaled on that one. Now, and they have so far denied one project on it was the 144 kilowatt project that would have been visible 0.8 of a mile away from Mount Pilot. They recently denied a 500 kilowatt project up in the Northeast Kingdom for grid constraints. That's it.
Okay. Representative Odie on the fave.
Have you ever, what would you think of just having a list of where projects presumptively ought to be rather than the other way around?
Well, that's what the enhanced energy planning is supposed to be about. It's very hard. It's very hard to do. The regional commissions have punted to the towns because we can't do it at the regional level. And, you know,
I heard that, but they're just saying, just designate without any guidance, so then it ends up in forest. What if the guidance came from something higher up, state level, and just said, on landfills, on
the built landscape, rooftops, parking lots. These are what the people that talk to me about their dismay at the solar siting. Why do they keep covering fields? Why are they cutting forests? And people are not happy about what's happening. Even though they love solar energy.
So the idea is, why not put that in?
If you could put that in, however, the answer will be that to meet our goals, we have to build so much solar that it's not cost effective to do it on these others. I mean, it's a very complicated topic.
It's very complicated. We spent a ton of time on it when we did the rules. I just want to make sure that Representative LaFave gets this question in.
Annette, do you have an opinion as to whether or not the siting of industrial turbines should be transferred out of PUC to Act 250?
first answer is yes. The second answer is that I believe after the decade that I've spent immersed in the issue, not just on the environmental side, but on the social side and the environmental justice issues that I've witnessed, that it is an inappropriate technology for Vermont and no industrial wind turbines belong in this state. And the best thing you could do is just shut the conversation down because it is a fight that nobody wants to come to their town, and it's a guaranteed fight, and it does real damage to people and the environment.
I would like to draw the committee's attention to testimony that we received during the commission, Act 250 commission process, and Annette did provide us a lot of interesting ideas on ways of managing this review process, and bridging the two processes between 248 and 250, and extensive, detailed suggestions that are worth looking at. And then also, League of Cities and Towns came in yesterday with an opinion that I think is different than what they provided the commission, so it's worth looking at that. I asked Laura to send us that link. There's a lot of public input. We did a lot of process in there. As the last few days of evidence, it's not perfect, but it was a huge job, and we're here to try to fix it up. But
And I believe from what I'm hearing that the PUC and the Natural Resources Board are all open to this idea. I don't think that there's much opposition to exploring.
to exploring a kind of a hybrid approach of reviewing. So that's sure, that's great. Another reason.
Just from a practical perspective, we have regional offices in activity, making everybody come to Montpelier is crazy, but the legal process of the PUC, well, got me under a criminal investigation by the Attorney General's office. I was accused of practicing law without a license for helping people participate in the regulatory process. And so that should speak volumes about what a legalistic process. It's not friendly to the people.
So anyway, I encourage you to explore that. It's on last session's webpage, so you need to change sessions if you look for the Act 250 Commission. Not the special session, but the actual 2017-18 biennium. It's in there. So all of it's there. Please read it.
And we post all our videos, and there was video of that meeting and all the other commission meetings. John's been very good at covering those. So you can find them on our YouTube channel. Go to our website, go to our blog, look at YouTube one, and you can find all the things there.
Including the bear study results.
Thank you for coming in.
Yes, thanks a lot.